Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today we're going to cover a subject that's gaining speed online. Speed in all the conspiratorial circles, and one that has been and will be continued to be used to exploit the sale of products that perhaps you don't need. But we're going to go through it just in case it does happen. This is about the collapse of the Federal Reserve Bank. A bank that is as federal as Federal Express, as they always say. Now, Federal Express is obviously not a federally funded business. I think it should be passed as an amendment or a law that no business should be able to use the word federal in their title, and we need to pick every other word that would signify a government institution, such that these companies cannot pawn themselves off as something more official than they really are. Really sorry, you got to rename yourself, right? Federal Express, you can just be FedEx, right? But the word federal should be reserved for something run by us. Now, what's interesting is a lot of you are woke, as they say, and you try to wake people up with little statements, things that make them go, And one of the best questions I've ever heard asked of official story people is, what do you know about the Federal Reserve? Nothing, usually. Is it a federal institution? Well, of course it is. No, it's not. What do you mean? It's a private for-profit bank. Its members, the people who own the organization, are 80% concealed. But we, the people, own 10% of their institution. Now, I just recently said that in an episode, and I want to make sure you guys understand. I learned everything I know about the Federal Reserve from two people online, Bill Still, Still, and Aaron Rouzeau, who's passed because he got stomach cancer right after making a documentary busting the Federal Reserve and the IRS for their fraudulent electoral voluntary tax system on your wages that is portrayed to the people as a mandatory tax. The only mandatory tax in the United States of America is federal taxes, tobacco, and firearms. Your wages are your property. That's what the founders of America ensured in the Constitution, and that is the thing they went right after to blur the lines on so that they could tax you. Again, the only legal tax against wages, which would have to be, again, a 2/3 majority vote, and an amendment to the Constitution of the United States would be an apportioned tax, which means everyone gets taxed at a flat rate. The second you vary the tax brackets, you're now against the Constitution of the United States. There's no law or statute that says you have to pay taxes on your wages. But they hate it when you say that. We do it anyway because we don't need the deep state up our asshole. But if what we're going to be talking about today occurs, then all that changes, right? And maybe we elect to go ahead and change the Constitution such that your wages or your property is amended to be different. Maybe. The idea was that if you hear like some official story person coming at you about taxes, well, we got to pay for stuff. Hey, you're absolutely correct. And that's what corporations were supposed to do. So all these banking oligarchy families and their proxies went to a little island called Jekyll Island, and they schemed together the 16th Amendment, which came with the IRS. It was never ratified by all the states, so they went in under gunpoint, probably some Pinkerton power. I believe Philadelphia, I think Tennessee and Kentucky and Oklahoma all reported in that on Christmas Eve, state officials were held at gunpoint to vote yes on the 16th Amendment. Now, what really happened, it was definitely some fuckery. But so William Hearst, the gentleman, I'm giving this background because this is where this institution comes from. William Hearst, the big yellow journalism guy. Yellow journalism is when a newspaper lies to create reality, right? It's basically fake news, and it's been around for over 150 years, okay? At least in the United States of America. They got a poor history professor, Woodrow Wilson, to run for president, following up the first Skull and Bones president, Taft, the big fat guy. They got on the back of a train and drove all around America in the little caboose parties, right? And they said that the 16th Amendment had been ratified. And so everybody said, hurrah, hurrah, because it was sold to them as a typical left progressive Robin Hood socialistic bunch of bullshit, that they were only going to tax the corporations and not the people, when the corporations were already taxed. I mean, that's how stupid we were about this whole thing. But the tax code was immediately rewritten with infinite loopholes for corporations that could zero out their books and never pay taxes, and stuck it all to the people. As I heard it, I believe, from Bill Still, or a resource of that nature, they gathered $360 million in the first year they collected taxes in this country. Franz Ferdinand is murdered in Europe. Starts World War I. They try to drag us in simply because they want us to borrow money. No other reason. There's no moral reason. There's no rhyme or reason to it other than to make us borrow money. We, a million miles away from that problem, sort of broke, said, we don't need this. We don't need this war. We stayed out of it until 1917. Then we push in. I think we stayed about 11 months and the war's over. And so they didn't get what they wanted. But they had a plan after plan after plan. So the 1920s, which you'll hear as the Roaring Twenties, was actually a decade where they were raping all of those individuals who escaped Europe with their money and set up shop here in America. They were lured into horrible investment vehicles, which all went tits up. In 1929, they rescinded 3/4 of the cash out of circulation in the United States because they controlled it through the Federal Reserve. And then everywhere they possibly could, they called in the notes, meaning the loans, exercising a little tiny clause in the bottom of the contract that said, under like freak circumstances, we can ask you to pay off your loan. And you went ahead and signed it because never in the history has anyone ever exercised that clause. Well, that year they exercised all of them. They would tell you that a bunch of financial people and bankers threw themselves out of windows, committing suicide because they lost all their money. Now, maybe that happened once or twice, but the majority of the people that jumped from a window were being thrown out of fucking windows because they figured out the scam. They were in on it so deep that they could finger all the people involved. So now we have a little bit of money we borrowed for the war, World War I. I mean, for us to say that we won World War I and that we participated and we won World War I for Americans, it's a fucking joke. Okay, we were barely ever there. We barely contributed to jack shit. Sure, we walked in and took the drunk guy who's already been punched in the face 1,000 times and punched him in the nose one time, and of course he falls down like a feather. That's not being, even fair, okay? What were the 1930s about? How'd the Federal Reserve play a role in that? Well, again, the same people that created the Federal Reserve are now running our country because they control our money. Go look at the Rothschilds from the 1800s. They said, I care not who passes the laws as long as I control their currency. Because as long as I control their currency, everyone has a price, right? 1930s were all about seizing the gold from the middle class, getting everyone converted to shitty fiat currency and taking all the real currency, gold and silver, and pushing it into Fort Knox, which was then immediately put on trains and shipped all over the place. Probably a bunch in New York, but a bunch probably went to Europe as well. Fort Knox is named after a guy named Philander Knox, not the Navy admiral that they always tell you. That's a bunch of bullshit. Why Philander Knox? Philander Knox is a gentleman who was an attorney for all the big families, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Vanderbilts, Carnegies, Morgans. He was their lead dude. He drafted probably the initial 16th Amendment. He was inserted into the White House out of private practice for those families right at the turn of the 20th century. By 1934, we are in a massive depression that they contributed to, starting in 1929. They force everyone out of their gold. And the only way that we're allowed to get out of the depression is to get involved with a war that is raging from the very orchestrated and created Adolf Hitler in Europe. Now, maybe one day I'll do a World War II episode and go through the issues surrounding that, because it's unraveling. The history that you've been taught your whole life, it's beautifully being undone with facts. Okay, that's the beautiful thing. But we go into 1941, December 7th, the false flag, known as Pearl Harbor. For anyone who struggles with the Pearl Harbor being a false flag, there's a couple pieces of evidence, but I'll tell you one of the greatest pieces of evidence is that my stepfather, who believes every official story on planet Earth, did his research and came back to me about 10 years ago, and he said, you're right about Pearl Harbor. That was completely orchestrated. I mean, completely orchestrated. I said, yeah. So, with the other, we embargoed the strategic resources from going into Japan. We gave them no choice but to come down and attack us. It was a very cause and effect model there. We had two big Navy fleets down by Hawaii. Both admirals were told to drive their fleets way out east and west and do circles. And they said, well, sir, we know that they're coming. We embargoed all their stuff. And the President of the United States said, you do what you're told. That's why you get to get the big bucks, right? Both gentlemen, after Pearl Harbor, within, 30 days, were given the naval equivalent of the Medal of Honor, and both families have actually held a press conference at Honolulu, off Oahu, and proved that those medals were awarded for basically doing what they're told. But in the public eye, they were scorned because they were out gallivanting around while Pearl Harbor was getting bombed. Okay? So you have two layers to the Federal Reserve. You have the institution that is, again, a private for-profit bank, just like any bank you've ever gone to. It has nothing to do with the federal government. Except that its owners are categorically European. And in the 1800s in the United States, there were several efforts to start such a bank. And again, right around 1800, we had an equivalency of this type of bank. And in 1811, the lease came up on that bank. Basically our agreement to let them operate in this country. And we said, no thanks. And the War of 1812 broke out, which said, we're going to continue pounding you with all the resources from Europe until you sign that bank back into function. We cowered down, signed, because we were not in any financial or military position to fight them indefinitely after the Revolutionary War, right? So, we bought some time. Andrew Jackson came in the 1830s and held them off for a little bit longer. But then they pushed back in. Then Lincoln, trying to fight the Civil War, had to borrow some money to pay his soldiers. He goes to the Rothschilds, and I think according to Bill Still, they were going to loan Lincoln money at 3,600% interest. Can you fucking imagine? It's just unbelievable, man. You borrow $1 and it's $36 back. When they know you need it, they fuck you. Right? That's evil. That is absolute evil. Hey, man, you can take a fee for loaning someone money, but that kind of interest is just incredible, and it's most likely compound interest as well. So Lincoln prints the greenback. He prints our own money and says, screw you. I'll back it by our gross national product, or gross domestic product. Screw you. And they shot him in the back of the head while he was watching a play. That's why he was murdered. But we knew, our politicians knew they were trying to pull this game. And so it took them another 50 years to get it passed. 16th Amendment, allowing the formation and dependency on fiat currency to a foreign bank. Now, in order to understand what steps we would take during a collapse, you have to understand how their money functions. It's been given, visual examples have been given in the movie Zeitgeist, the very first one. He does a pretty good job. There's two factors that are really important: how the money is created and then how it is loaned out. I've given this example several times in my lifetime and a couple times on the show. We need to review. When you think about someone loaning you money, a neighbor or a friend, you don't sweat too much unless you're borrowing a tremendous amount of money. But when you borrow from the Federal Reserve as the sole creator of your currency, it's a different game. And it's not because it's a lot of money, it's because it's the only money. What does that mean? Okay, you and I are sitting across from a table. I'll play the Federal Reserve, so you don't have to be the bad guy. The initial example is it's just you and I, friends, and you need to borrow $1. And so I say, okay, I'll loan you $1, but you owe me 10 cents back, more when you pay me back. So 10% interest. Here, sign this contract that says you're going to pay me back $1.10 when you pay me back on these terms. Now, a contract is what we call a piece of paper that it creates an agreement between two people. But when you go between a bank and a country, they call that a bond. So anytime you hear a bond, war bond, all at bonds, it's basically an agreement to pay back the person who bonds themselves to it. But if I loan you $1, I literally push $1 across the table and I say, okay, now pay me back immediately. You're not even capable of spending the money yet. And you're like, oh, okay, here's your $1 back. I say, now I need 10 cents more because you signed that agreement right there. And you're like, okay, well, I got 10 cents in my pocket. I got 10 cents somewhere in the couch sofa over there. I'll borrow 10 cents from a neighbor. You're not sweating it because there's money outside of this agreement. And this is where most Americans don't get it. That works because it's not the only money source in the world. Now let's make you the United States of America and I'm the Federal Reserve. I loan you $1 with a contract for you to pay me back $1.10. This is the first day you've ever had money. The day after the 16th Amendment is passed, let's just say. And then I'm a jerk and I say, pay me back. Right after I give you the money. And you're like, well, here's your $1 back. And I go, where's my 10 cents? It says right here, you signed up, 10 cents more, 10% interest on that $1. And you're like, well, I don't have any more of your money, the kind of money that you create, because you never created the dime extra, so there's no way for me to pay you completely back. You see how that gets to be a Ponzi scheme? It's an illegal loan because it has a mathematical impossibility. But it is the way that the 16th Amendment works with the United States of America. Take any of the printed money you have of United States currency and flip it on the back and read the top. It says Federal Reserve Note. That means it's their property. Even though our tax dollars pay for the ink and the paper, it's their property. A private for-profit bank owns all of the printed money in the United States. Now, what's sovereign money? What's money that they don't control? All of our coins. The penny, nickel, dime, quarter, half dollar, silver dollar, Susan B. Anthony. Those have been deemed legal tender, and they don't own it. But that's one reason why they want to get rid of coins. So, every single dollar that has been in existence in America since 1913 has been illegally created Ponzi scheme money. Let me repeat that. The money you hold in your hand shouldn't exist, the printed money, because it was loaned to us with a physical, mathematical impossibility to ever pay off the loan of its creation. Because the interest that you owe is never, ever, ever created. And so when America comes back to the Federal Reserve and says, I can't pay the extra 10 cents, the Federal Reserve simply says, oh, that's no problem. I'll make the 10 cents and you can borrow that from me too at interest. And so it keeps going and it keeps going. But politicians don't care, do they? They're going to be in and out. It's not their money. They want to do fun things with the money. They know people need things. They don't understand economics to save their fucking soul. Economics is probably the most undereducated subject in this country of America. And our president, Donald Trump, just happens to have an exceptional degree in it. That's the difference. They say we're trillions and trillions of dollars in debt to these exact bankers. Why are we in debt? Well, because we borrow a ton of money with this crappy Ponzi scheme, this illegal fucking Ponzi scheme. Then we're taxed as citizens illegally because there's no law or statute that says you must pay taxes on your personal wages. Now, if you volunteer into the system, if you file a tax return, you're in it. You've got to pay. That's what the law says. They can come to your house and take all your shit. But they have been preying on the ignorant, which is why Aaron Rizzo most likely no longer exists on this planet. So every single president in the United States of America, save two since 1913, have been puppets of the bankers. The Skull and Bones organization, which, as I'm told, migrated into the United States of America and hid in the Yale University in 1834. Andrew Jackson tried to find him, but he couldn't find him because he didn't know they were in Yale. Their charter in 1834 was to take over the United States of America by all financial means necessary. They were the ambassadors, the children of these banking families. They may not be the exact tippy-top families, but they're close enough, and they serve them well. It's no surprise that President Taft, the first Skull and Bones president that we ever had, introduced Philander Knox's draft of the 16th Amendment. Now, his name won't be on those documents, Philander, but trust me, that's who put it together for us. We have since had at least two other Skull and Bone presidents, President George Herbert Walker Bush and his son, George W. Bush. The Central Intelligence Agency was formed exclusively for approximately the first 20 years of its existence out of Skull and Bone members. Well, who shot Kennedy again? Why did Kennedy get shot? Well, he was going to do two things. He figured it all out. How he figured it out baffles me, right? He didn't have the internet, a bunch of you guys letting him know what's going on. He figured out that the Federal Reserve was doing what it was doing. It was an impossible money scheme. So he wanted to shut it down. Replace it with our own money. He was going at silver first as a mechanism to create enough currency in people's pockets that they could operate without using the notes, trying to kind of wean us off these fake pieces of fiat. We're going to get to fractional reserve banking here in a second. But the other thing is he realized that this agency, which had a couple names, was engaging in operations all around the world, using our piggy bank to take over countries, to give them to the European owners of the Federal Reserve. So he wanted to get rid of that agency as well. And they killed him. A bunch of people wanted him dead. LBJ wanted him dead because he wanted to be president, because he was just a narcissistic piece of fucking shit. Any picture of LBJ should be taken off the wall and burned. That guy should just be erased from fucking history. What a petty, petty man he was. They say Castro wanted him dead. I don't know. He was refusing to allow the CIA to invade Cuba. So sort of was helping Castro out and trying to negotiate some sort of settlement. Castro's big problem is that he told the State Department that you give me guns and training and I'll take over this country and then I'll be your ally. So he takes over the country, uses our resources, and then flips the bird to the State Department. And that's when they said, oh, no, we don't play that game. And that's why if I try to smoke a Cuban cigar, it's illegal in America. I mean, you can go get your own, but you can't buy it from anybody. Pathetic how the white man hangs on to grudges like that. Unfucking believable, right? But the second problem that the 16th Amendment introduced was something called fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking is the notion that, well, what is fiat currency? What is that? Well, it's a piece of paper that represents an asset in some vault somewhere. That's the theory of it anyway, right? Now, we don't have any real assets. The idea was that when they formed the Federal Reserve after the 16th Amendment was falsely ratified, usually when you start a business and you want to have like 100 shares in a business, you either issue it all for free and then give it to your partners in whatever ratio they deserve, or you value it at $1 bill and everyone has to put in $1 for every share that they get. So 100 shares requires $100. You have to buy your shares. Well, out of all of the shares that the Federal Reserve created for this private for-profit bank, only the United States, who's a 10% partner, put all of its gold and assets into this organization and got its shares, its 10% shares. The other 90% of the shares, which should be purchased or backed by assets of these European oligarchy families, they simply took the printing press, ink and paper, printed the crappy currency you have in your wallet, and submitted it as their 90% payment for their shares. I mean, the fuckery is unbelievable. The fact that we had senators that continued to not say anything, the people couldn't figure it out, was just astonishing. I don't know how it happened. But back in the day, when someone would go to the Rothschilds, back in the 1700s, and say, I've got $1,000 worth of gold, and they give them $1,000 worth of little pieces of paper to vouch for that gold, and if anybody wanted to get the gold, they come back to they take this note, which has got your name on it, they take it to the Rothschilds and say, I'd like to pick up $100 of their gold because they gave me the certificate for some services or products that I gave them. And they're like, fine. They go back to the vault, they pull $100 worth of gold, put an ingot underneath the window, take the certificate out of circulation, mark it in the ledger, down $100. But what they realized was nobody was coming back for the gold. They were just operating out there in the world with these paper certificates, representations of things that were in vaults. And so they realized, Jesus, you know what I could do? Because the law of averages is that only 1/10 of the people come back and get their stuff. So I can loan out 90% more of this paper than the actual gold I have in the vault. And that's what the Federal Reserve learned, or the members of the Federal Reserve all had individually learned 100 years earlier. And so when they created the Federal Reserve, which made the banking rules, okay, any bank that's certified to operate in the United States of America, if they had $1 of gold in the bank, they could loan out $9 because only 10% of the people come back. Now, have you ever heard of anybody taking a $1 bill note and going and getting $1 worth of gold? It doesn't work like that anymore, does it? So now it's all fake money. It's completely fake. So if a bank moves in and puts in $1 million, they can immediately loan $9 million. Well, now, wait a minute. What's a loan? When you go to get a loan, how does that work? You want to start a business. You want $20,000 to start a business. It's a small business. You go to the bank and you try to borrow $20,000, and they say, well, we need collateral. What's that? Oh, that's, you have to give us the right to seize assets in your side of the fence that are worth the $20,000 we're going to loan you. So if you go tits up on this loan, you don't pay it back, we get to come take your stuff. And so usually people sign up their homes, their cars. Cars don't really translate to much because they lose so much value. Jewelry, assets, gold, stocks, whatever the bank will accept as collateral. Once you've got up to $20,000 or close to it, they give you the loan. But now here's the rub. When you get something like a home loan, it's much different, right? Because a home loan, they know you don't have $500,000. If you're in California, you get an average house where I live for $500,000. They know you don't have $500,000 in assets that can be seized, so they're taking a risk, and they're saying, okay, we'll give you the $500,000, which then you will give to the person who owns the house so that you can move in the house. And then you sign up for a 10, 20, 30-year loan, depending on how big your paycheck is, to pay us back. Well, now, technically speaking, they have created $500,000 in cash, probably numbers in a computer, and they're transferring those numbers to another computer in some other person's bank account. Might even be the same bank. What they're telling the person that they're giving the money to is that they actually have assets in their own possession to back up that loan. Now, one house for one big giant bank like Chase Manhattan, sure, they've got plenty of money to back up one house. $500,000? Geez. Most of those guys walk around with that in their pockets, right? But if you took all the loans that a single bank has loaned out, they don't have the money to back up all the loans, and they rely on fractional reserve banking as a legal mechanism for loaning out money. It's not illegal. It's nonsensical, but it's not illegal to loan money out. So chances are, if you have bought a house and the economy got bad and your bank comes to foreclose on your house, you are a part of a ruse. They're saying, well, this house is ours and you haven't paid it off, so we're going to subtract this and that, and you're going to get a short sale on it or what have you. But if you took them to court and said, prove that you have the money to back up that loan for every single loan that you've ever given out, the hard assets to back up this virtual currency that you transferred from one bank account digit in a database to another bank account digit in another database, they couldn't prove it. And there was a guy that actually did this somewhere in the Midwest, and he had a house worth $35,000. I think he did this in the 70s, but you can still do it in the 80s, of course. But he won in court. He said the local bank, didn't have the real money to back up his house when compared to all the other loans that they had given out. So instead of risking that story going to press, they just walked away. He got the house for free. Well, he had paid off the house. He just hadn't paid off all the interest. You have to understand the history of the Federal Reserve and its fuckery to understand what the Federal Reserve collapsing means to you and to your country of America, right? Now, there has been a change in America as of 2016. A president with an amazing pedigree in economics, went to the best economic school in the United States of America and graduated very high in his class. He turned a few $1,000,000 into a $10 billion empire. Is now the president of the United States. And so we're now, for the first time in the history of this country, since it formed and started taking on presidents such as, George Washington. Apparently there were like 7 to 11 presidents before him, including an African gentleman. But since then, we haven't had ever in history an economic president. Someone understands the economy, someone understands money, someone knows how to negotiate, someone who's done it a bunch of times, been extremely successful at it. Sure, he's got, he hasn't personally gone bankrupt, but institutions he's worked have gone bankrupt. I think he's had 76 corporations in his lifetime. I think 4 went tits up. Any of you who've ever started a corporation know that is an unbelievably successful record, okay? So they don't like him. Europe doesn't like him. All the globalists hate Trump because he's bringing back nationalism, as I just did an episode on. He's bringing back sovereignty. And he's trying to follow the letter of the law in the Constitution of the United States. Well, what are his opposing forces? Well, your leftist progressives, your right-wing sellouts are all against him. But the beautiful thing is they're all criminals. They have committed such crimes that they could all be executed under sedition and treason charges. I don't mean all of them, but a lot of them. A lot of the ones in power. And he has them hopefully dead to rights, according to Q. Whitaker is going to have some fun. Hopefully make a lot of episodes about the aftermath of this whole thing. So they can cock-block all of his laws, use these Ninth Circuit judges to literally violate the sanctity of this country. They'll all lose in the end. So how do they stop him? How do they stop him? And what does he want to do ultimately? Well, they could try to kill him, and supposedly they have, again, as I mentioned in previous episodes. They can try to get him impeached, right? The House can impeach a president for absolutely no reason whatsoever. But the Senate has to ratify that, 2/3 majority, and that'll never happen, ever. So it's a complete waste of your taxpayer dollars. For those of you who want to hug social programs, you're, a leftist, the impeachment process would waste tens of millions of dollars, just like this phony fucking Mueller Russian collusion story. It's already wasted, I think, 12 million euros every single month. Those could be paying off student loans, funding the arts, whatever. Complete waste of time. But one of the most controlling apparati is the Federal Reserve Bank. They control the interest by which money is loaned. Now, I've said in the past, I have a family member of mine that has worked, now retired, for the Federal Reserve for 20 years. For the first 10, I was asleep. For the second 10, I was wide awake going, oh my God. Now, this individual doesn't know anything about the bank and its devious nature, doesn't want to believe it in the first place, so sort of a we went to the moon kind of mentality. But I want you guys to know that. What that's allowed me to do is data mine the average intellect of someone who works for the bank. Now, get this. Works for the Federal Reserve for 20 years, I think even more than that. When I mentioned fractional reserve banking, this person said, I don't even know what that is. This person teaches economics in colleges. Doesn't know what fractional reserve banking is. And then went away, came back and said, oh, it's not even called that. It doesn't work that way anyway. Now, how many tens of thousands of videos on YouTube by economic professors have talked about fractional reserve banking? And no one has refuted them. No one has said this doesn't exist. I'm going to debunk this whole concept. There's thousands of videos talking about fractional reserve banking. Yet a senior employee at that organization doesn't know it exists. Talk about fucking compartmentalization, right? Talk about pre-censorship, as Rod Serling said, 1959. We need to hire people that don't know this exists, that are just bound to never learn it. Like they have cancer, and you push the cure to cancer over in a little tiny slip of paper, and it says just one ingredient. Just take that one ingredient, and you'll cure your cancer. And they push it back because they're like, I don't want your stuff. I'm going to die and get all my sympathy, right? Okay. But what the Federal Reserve does is they loan banks money in the middle of the night with usually like 24-hour to 48-hour terms on the money. It's a lot of money. And there's sometimes they loan it to each other at almost no interest, and then they charge you interest for it. Now they're starting to raise the interest rates, right? Now interest rates are interesting because what that allows you to do is get more interest in your bank account technically. Now banks, unlike when I was a kid, you'd put money in a savings account and it would accrue interest. Now it is a fucking joke. They've taken it all away, right? Just like video game companies that create great games when they start because they profit share with their employees, right? Blizzard Entertainment just recently completely squashed this. EA, when I first joined 1993, they were profit sharing with the departments. Make a great game, get a big paycheck at the end of the year. Well, eventually they make it a group, they make an individual department bonus, then they make it a group bonus for the entire company, then they just get rid of it. Blizzard just got rid of theirs, and that's why their company sucks now, right? Too bad. They could change, of course, and this will be recorded in time. But as of 2018, winter, their CEOs quit. They've lost, I think, 15 million monthly subscribers. That's what happens, right? I digress. So the Federal Reserve is now trying to threaten Donald Trump. We'll screw up your economy, they say to him. He's been asked about it a couple times. Donald Trump's entire mechanism and methodology for his adversaries is, one, to throw them a branch, throw them an olive branch and say, okay, I'm not going to badmouth you in front of everyone, because maybe when we sit down and talk behind closed doors, non-transcribed conversations, you will get to a point where we can work out a deal. They may have worked out a deal. Hell, maybe they only talk in interviews, right? He takes an interview, says a little bit. Someone over in Europe takes an interview, says a little bit, and they communicate through interviews. It could happen like that. They never actually sit down. But now there's this rumor that we are going to go into a collapse. And again, I made an episode, 3 years ago about this economic collapse bullshit? All these fucking conspiracy channels peddling gold and silver. Instead of just selling gold and silver as a great mechanism to invest to protect yourself, which is smart, they threaten you with financial collapse. Was it X22 web channel? His fucking logo is a stock market symbol going down. I mean, he's literally praying that the economy crashes. When this bad news comes around, if it ever does, that guy's going to be high-fiving himself, right? Do you really want to get your information from someone like that? Aren't you always concerned about ulterior motives? Aren't you concerned about shills? Anyone peddling economic collapse to push shit on you for their sponsorship to a channel, I'm telling you, I will never take that type of sponsor. If I ever peddle gold and silver selling, it will simply be because it's a good idea, not because it's a threat against your existence, right? But they're talking about this huge collapse. Well, what would fuel such a thing? Well, companies typically need loans. They need loans to expand. They need loans to bridge between seasons, right? Almost every company has an off season, right? Even if you made cold and flu medicine and you made billions and trillions of dollars every time that, the shit sprays in the sky and we all get sick, you still have a season between October and May. In summertime, everyone's healthy, getting some sun photons, feeding their body what it's made out of. So sometimes they'll take bridge loans. Bridge loans are enough money to pay off June, July, August, maybe September's payroll. Just in case it gets lean, you got some protection. But when you start making all your profit again, boom, you pay back the loan and you're okay. Well, if they start to mess with the interest rates by which people could borrow that money, then those loans that were typically affordable to bridge between A and B are now going to be so expensive to pay off at the end of the term, you don't borrow the money because it would just put you under. And so you go to business intentionally to protect yourself. But there's more factors in that with this particular collapse, isn't there? We have a bunch of .coms that are extremely overvalued. Their profits don't match at all their value. Now, these organizations could go out of business organically, and these businesses could be tanked intentionally. Take Facebook. I will tell you right now that if we could have a little moment of truth, like a little God meter that would answer a question, either true or false, I'm willing to submit that 1/3 to 50% of every registered Facebook user is a fake account. I'm willing to bet that at least 50% of those fake accounts are not Russian bots, they are Facebook bots. They create fake accounts. And so that when you buy advertising on Facebook, you could prove this in a court of law. Now, they could quickly change things to get around this, okay? But if you buy advertising for one of your pages on YouTube, you create a page and you buy advertising, $50 or whatever, to drive people to subscribe to your page, to like your page, you will have hundreds and hundreds of likes. But the second you post anything and look at your insights, meaning how many people looked at that post, it'll be like 5, 10 people, because those people are fake. And I had this experience with our MK Ultra radio page. We were buying advertising, and then we get all these subscribers. We had 650 subscribers within a month and a half. I'd post something, and only 10 people would look at it. And I know I was one, and my co-host was the other, and our friends and family are the other 8 people. Now, what are the odds that you immediately like or that you like a page, on a Monday? I post something Monday night, and you don't look at it? It's something you're excited about. You like the page, and you never come back to look at it. It's proof that Facebook is largely inflated in its numbers. But now, is there a law that says you can't do that? No. But is there a crime in taking someone's money and faking results? That could be contested in a court of law. Now, we know organizations exist overseas in China that will like your page a bunch, that will give you a bunch of subs on YouTube, that will fake reviews in iTunes on your app, your app or your Google Play or whatever. Those exist, right? So we have a bunch of companies that are valued over $1 billion. We have a bunch of companies that are approaching $1 trillion market caps. Absolutely absurd values. What's Google stock? I think I looked at it yesterday. It was $1,043 for a single share. Why would a company keep one share, over $1,000? Because they don't want you to buy it, because it's a Alphabet agency. Its holding company is called Alphabet Inc. Oh, wow. Amazing. Right in your fucking face, right? Don't be evil, right? Eric Schmidt resigned within 3 days of Trump signing the executive order that says if you're caught in child trafficking or human trafficking, we're going to seize all your assets and you will go away forever. He resigns immediately. Rumor has it that his little jet setting around the world was full of a bunch of teenage girls. I don't know if that's true. That's what I heard. Seems odd that guy's on top of the world, and now he does this tour and takes shits on who? Oh, the guy that isn't part of the club, right? And all the previous presidents, between Kennedy and Trump and Kennedy back to probably Taft, were in on the payroll, either through the very incidental thing of Woodrow Wilson and his handler, Colonel Moon, or they were just simply in on it. So I'm seeing article headlines like the Great Depression of America, which is about 36% unemployment, right? Which would be, it's monstrous unemployment. You are in a soup line to get your food. That'll be just a mere bump in history compared to the economic collapse that's coming. You need to understand that the President of the United States is well aware of all of the circumstances surrounding what it means to collapse the Fed. It was asked to QAnon, is the Federal Reserve going to be shut down? His response was reorganized. Now, I have an episode way back when about replacing our money. If that's interesting to you, go take a look at it. We're going to just briefly highlight some of the concepts from that episode, but I go into great detail. And you're going to hear some of the analogies given in this episode repeated in that one. But again, there's a lot of extra information over there. So let's say that the Federal Reserve collapses. For whatever means, they try to raise interest rates so high that no one can loan money to anyone. It starts to affect the businesses. Businesses start trickling down. What the Federal Reserve and the bankers of Europe try to do, and again, the Federal Reserve is sort of a tiny little proxy into the problem. It creating our money is the dumbest thing on planet Earth. And again, you'll have people cite the fact that the mints are actually owned by the United States of America. All the paper and ink is our property. But again, we're making it on behalf of this other entity. Imagine, you're a carpenter and you make tables. But every table that you make, you spend all your resources to make it, but then immediately it's your neighbor's property. And they use it to do business with, and you never get to make any profit off of it. That's sort of as insane as our money is right now. But we have a national debt, don't we? Isn't that a big problem for the United States of America and Europe in general? Let's think about that. If I took an illegal loan from a loan shark, some real bad individual, and then I couldn't pay it back, or I refused to pay it back, and he's coming for me, right? He sends his thugs after me, and that doesn't work. I get rid of them. And so his only option is to come after me personally. And usually loan sharks are pretty badass guys personally. That's how they got the whole game started. Now I'm in a parking lot, and the guy descends on me in a parking lot, and he's got a gun, and I managed to somehow survive that situation, and the police arrive. And they arrest him because he has a gun. They check to see if I'm okay. And they take me down and book me or whatever just to see, who I am and all that kind of stuff. And they release me because they realize I'm the good guy. And they know I've taken a loan from this dude. And they're like, well, you're a dumbass. But, it's between you and him. It's like really a personal loan that's just got a lot of penalties, right? Your kneecaps. Does the law come in and say, you have to pay this loan shark back? Fuck no. They just go, well, good luck, man. Hopefully he stays in prison long enough or doesn't know someone on the outside that'll fuck you up. You might consider moving, changing your identity, cut off that hair. Well, that's our relationship with our national debt. We have taken money, and not every single penny, okay? We have legitimate countries like China who have loaned us money. I think without interest problems like the Federal Reserve creating our money without interest being created. But the main multi-trillion-dollar debt that we have is to the equivalency of a corporate loan shark. It's technically an illegal loan. So all the interest that we owe the Federal Reserve and his partner members is illegal. So if we had, say, $21 trillion in debt in the United States, well, how much of that goes to China? Let's say $1.5 trillion. But the rest is all bullshit. Well, shit, man, we can pay off $1.5 trillion in no time flat. Trust me. The Pentagon loses trillions every year, right? We've paid $7 trillion just to fight a ridiculous war overseas, right? With no benefit to us whatsoever. So where does all this debt come from? It comes from decades and decades of indoctrination as citizens of the United States believing that the money creation system in this country is legit, and that it's fair, and that it could possibly ever be paid back. Well, it can't. So let's review that collapse again, the collapse of the Federal Reserve. Well, if I were Trump, one, I would educate through tweets and through podium sessions and maybe even Oval Office speeches to the American people, probably one every day or one every week for quite a while, educating the people on the economics of creating money, showing them that we could do what Lincoln did back in the Civil War and create our own money called the greenback, backed by our gold, backed by our assets. When we do trade with other countries for legitimate products and tax that taxation could be what funds our own money. There's a million ways to value money. But the first thing is that we don't need to panic at all. What's the idea? We can't get a hold of money? How did the 1929 crash happen? They rescinded out of circulation 3/4 of the money in the United States of America, roughly. That would never happen if we controlled that paper. How many of you have studied Bitcoin? And what's the big sales pitch of Bitcoin? Again, Bitcoin's an actual brand of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is what we call all digital currency that uses the blockchain, right? Every single division of Bitcoin has a limited amount of Bitcoin, which then what? Drives up its value. Now, it's a bunch of bullshit because they actually allow you to have infinite fractions of a particular piece of money. So it really doesn't carry over the promise, like they say. And spare me your hocus pocus economics to make that a reality. When you have printed money and the smallest unit of money is $1, and then you limit the amount of dollars, that's real limitation, right? But if you constantly say, well, you could take this piece of paper and rip a little piece off the dollar, now you have, a penny's worth of a dollar, that's a bullshit model, okay? There would definitely be some panic because we're uneducated as a whole nation on this situation. But if any of you have been truthers and you've tried to pass on the truth of the Federal Reserve and the IRS and the 16th Amendment, how this all happened, you now will become the priests of this country, and that you will give counseling to people almost like confession, reassuring them that everything's going to be okay. Don't sell off all your stuff. Don't even move, right? It's almost like freeze. There is a predator in the room that can only see you if you move, right? It's one of those kind of situations. What happens is the mint gets a new plate, right? We might be able to keep the look of a dollar bill, take the fucking pyramid off the back, take all that goddamn Illuminati shit out of there, take the owl out of the corner, all that crap. We have a new plate for the front and the back of every single bill that we sell here, that we put into circulation, And then we change it to say property of the United States of America instead of Federal Reserve note. Legal tender, baby. Instead of having the green seal, as a red seal. It says this is real legal tender, sovereign to our country, owned by no one else but the citizens of this country as a group corporation. And then there's the exchange, the big exchange. It takes maybe a decade, but 95% of the money is turned in, okay, or confiscated from banks and replaced with this new currency. Backed by who? Us, the United States of America. And so let's say we have 1 million units of money in circulation. It's way more than that, but let's just say we have 1 million units of printed currency. So 95% is replaced. And then over the next decade, grandpa, finds $1, someone finds $1 in a book or whatever. Some people are just collecting this shit, so it never gets turned in. It becomes illegal to use as legal tender, let's say a year or 10 years after this moment, right? But instantaneously, we have money. All the digital currency in banks, well, it just is considered all of a sudden digital currency of this new federal actual note, right? Truly federal, not a private for-profit bank, right? But a one-to-one translation, in my opinion, if you go see my Replacing Economy, and I'm going to do a little brief on that, right? Little cliff notes on this at this point. I don't think that's enough. We have inflated our currency so much, it's ridiculous. What does that mean for those of you who are like, I've heard that word, but I'm not quite sure how he's using it and what context he's using it in? Well, a house, back when I was a kid in the 70s, would cost anywhere from $10,000 to about $35,000. I think the house next door that I stare at the entire time I make this show sold in the 60s, early 60s, for $36,000. It's probably worth $700,000 now. The reason why it's worth $700,000 is that the buying power of your money has reduced considerably. Now, you still make more money, so everybody's always worried about inflation. It's like, yeah, okay, if inflation happens and, a gallon of milk costs, $5 instead of $2.50, and then, maybe it goes to 10 after that, you're making more money. So you used to make $75,000 a year, now you're making $100,000 a year because your employer knows you need a base amount of income to survive. You won't even take the job unless you can survive. So the whole thing goes up, right? And that's where nobody worries about our national debt, because you owe $1 trillion now, but then we dilute our money, we inflate it, and everyone makes more. And so again, if you for instance, this is not perfectly accurate, but it'll give you a little bit of a notion here. If that house costs $36,000, my car costs more than that, right? I could hold that note until 2018 and then pay it off with 2018 money. Then that paying off that house is a cinch. Is a cinch, right? I think we need to get to the point where we deflate our money. We go maybe a tenth of the currency that we have in circulation. Then how do we do that? If you had a dollar bill in your hand, the new one, that's completely sovereign and awesome, and I want to dilute that down to a dime, I can't just simply say the next day, you know that note you have in your hand? It's now worth 10 times the amount. I can't do that because then it just reverses the problem. Over the course of 20 years, I think within the first 10, I think you could aggressively do it within 5 if you really wanted to. We print a new currency. Maybe Americans can get some fucking color in their currency, right? Maybe at first it's only paper currency. Then you can invent new coins because coins themselves would be completely tampered with in terms of their value. Again, we know that copper pennies aren't copper. They got this zinc in the middle and all this other crap. You look at any type of, other than nickel. Nickel's the only one that's pure, right? But all the other coins have filler in them now. They're not pure silver quarters anymore. We could go back to that type of currency and then truly have value in our pockets. You could go on that date for 35 cents like my grandparents did, right? Why do that? Why mess with the money? Why deflate? Well, one, it counteracts the very formula of dealing with foreign currencies. Imagine we deflated to 1/10 of the currency, meaning everything is worth 10 times as much in this new currency. But you go to Europe, Jesus, you pull out an American dollar, boom, it's worth 10 times their single unit fiat currency. And boy, they would want our money like you can't believe, man. The world will go onto an American currency simply because it's valuable if they weren't able to copy us, right? But it also gates corruption. How many of you have heard of those schemes where someone takes a fraction of a transaction and puts it in a secret bank account, right? This happened a lot in the 70s with hackers who were making bank programs and they'd siphon it off. It's the plot in Office Space. It's the plot, I think, in Superman 3 with Richard Pryor, 2 or 3, where he was the hacker that was siphoning off money. That's possible because of inflation. It's really funny. The toll or the bill you pay when you drive in carpooling in California is $341. And I look at that $41, I think somebody's putting that in a weird bank account offshore, right? It just has that feeling of like, why not $340? Why not $350? Just round the fucking thing up, right? No, it's $341. Really weird. Well, now, if you deflate the economy by at least a tenth, okay, or to a tenth of what it is today, and someone tries to insert a single penny of penalty, well, that penny's now worth 10 times as much. It's worth a dime, right? How many of you love your cell phone bills with all this 9/11 tax on it, right? All these utilities with all these taxes. You'd notice it if someone put a little bit more in there. I think that's important. Not mandatory, but I think it would further differentiate our income, our money from the rest of the world. I think that's important. How does the Federal Reserve have power in the first place? It's all in your head. Just like the national debt is all in your head. There's a lot of people who talk about the national debt as this big trump card in the conversation, that somehow they're really involved with the world, right? They're worshiping their indoctrination. They're trying to have status in a conversation by dropping a big mad fact on everybody. Well, you know, the national debt's $21 trillion and Trump's just making that go up like crazy. Hey, trillions of dollars are spent on every president's watch. But when the previous, 60 years of presidencies has completely screwed up this country, and the one that comes in is not part of the Bohemian Grove, is not part of the Bilderberg Group, comes in and goes, Jesus Christ, I got to fix this fucking mess on my watch? Yeah, he's going to have to spend trillions of dollars to fix our military, to protect our borders, to rebuild our highways, our airports, everything. Our bridges, our railroad system. We have a tremendous amount of atrophy in this country because everyone's been ignoring it. All the senators raise all this pork belly spending for their state. It all goes in the pockets of these fucking contractors and other politicians. It buys, summer homes and vacations. It doesn't buy your highway, right? But again, because we're so inflated, if someone inserts $10,000 into their bank account and they're making $250,000 a year being a state senator or whatever, you barely notice that. Whoa. If they put $10,000 into their account and it's deflated by 90%, now you're going to notice. I mentioned Bug's Life several times on this show earlier, and its incarnation. I think Dave, one of our Facebook listeners who posts a lot of great stuff on the page, he reposted the clip from Bug's Life where the grasshoppers are talking to the lead grasshoppers talking to the other grasshoppers. If you haven't seen this movie, it's basically this. There's millions and millions of ants that live in the world, and they're run by some big, tough grasshoppers who number, I think, in like 8 to 10. But because the ants have subscribed to the idea that these grasshoppers are all powerful, they cower down to them. And how do the ants win at the end of the movie? They change the paradigm of thinking. They get rid of the slave mind that they have, and they kick the shit out of these grasshoppers. You've seen this arc in 1,000 movies, even like one of my favorite movies, Three Amigos, right? The Mexican village fights El Guapo, who's got like 20 guys on horseback with guns, and they fight back and beat them, right? Well, the Federal Reserve can do a couple things because they are owned by these families overseas. One, they can create the need to replace them. And that creates utter chaos in America for probably, 1 or 2 years. I think very quickly, once we replace their currency with our own sovereign currency, people are going to feel good really well. Really quickly. And the president just needs to go on TV and say, okay, here's the deal. Federal Reserve's out, new one's in. All of your money will be replaced. For now, keep using their crappy currency. It's still legal tender, but on this particular day, 90 days from this moment of me talking, you'll be able to go to any of your local banks and translate your money into the new money. But for the next year, both currencies are interchangeable. But the actual interest payments and national debt related to that money is no longer happening. So even though you're using those old notes, it has no association with Europe anymore. They are done. The grasshoppers have been kicked in the balls, and it's over. Okay. Well, they're owned again by these really powerful monarchy families all over Europe, these banker families all over Europe and the world, and there's a bunch of people in it all over the place, right? We're pretty sure that Russia and China are out of the game of using that currency, but I think China is kidding itself unless they've done some cooing of their own. I believe the number is like 49 banks in China are owned by the Rothschilds with Chinese names, so they're going to have to clean house over there as well, and I'm sure they would very quickly. So between China, Russia, and the United States, wow, we got trade. We're going great. You don't think other countries are going to follow really quickly? Oh yeah, they're going to follow really quickly. We might even have some sort of rescue plan for countries to do it. Those families can only cause problems if people buy into them. Well, how many times in your life have you seen someone pull a scam? Or even heard of such a thing, right? They pull a scam, and there's a bunch of people in on it, and then the scam gets exposed, and all the taggers on who are siphoning money off the scam, boy, they just vanish. They just disappear, right? I bet Kevin Spacey's dinner parties are pretty sparse these days, right? That's what happens. So the other retaliation, there's a bunch of different forms of retaliation. Some could be really severe, and we're going to go through those before it's over. They could take every corporation that they control outside of the United States of America, and maybe even some inside, but I think laws would be passed very quickly, executive orders would be passed very quickly that you can no longer do business with these organizations. And yes, some gigantic investment banking houses would probably go tits up fairly quickly. Stocks, well, they'd probably be suspended for a while. You wouldn't know exactly what your stock portfolio was worth. And that's why these guys scare you into gold and silver. Again, just get into gold and silver because it's a good idea. It never goes up and down in value. The money by which you value it goes up and down in money. So gold is never, an ounce of gold is always worth an ounce of gold. Okay? How many dollar bills it takes to buy it, or euros, or whatever, that's what changes. So if the price of gold goes up, that means the value of your dollar has gone down. If the price of gold goes down, that means your value went up. So you're safe either way, right? Now, the cool thing is, if we deflated, you might be able to get down to $35 ounces of gold like it used to be forever. Never wavered because our money had a fixed value. But yeah, they could cause a lot of issues. But now, as Trump has reminded most people, we're the big piggy bank over here. We have every strategic resource on our continent that we need to exist on this planet. We don't need to beg, borrow from anywhere. We have gold, we have coal, we have gasoline, we have everything. Okay? And again, we've already developed enough plutonium to blow up the entire world 50 times over, so we don't need any more uranium from anywhere. We have steel, everything. So we could become complete xenophobes. We won't, but we could be. And then this place becomes a goddamn utopia, protected by an army that is fully capable of fending off any aggressor. Instead of having the brightest people in the world and all of our ideas being stolen and made by copycats, it doesn't go anywhere. Trade secrets stay here. Our partners, China and Russia, they're going to have to follow the rules if they want to do trade with us, which they will, because we're friends with both those organizations, even though every American's told that we're not friends with those organizations, those people, those nations. It should be understood that the plan to replace the Federal Reserve is probably now close to 2 years old, even just in the White House alone. Now, if the rumors of Trump's election has to do with the anti-coup of the military, then that is probably more like 6 years old, those plans. But again, people far brighter than any of us have been thinking about this for a really long time, and most likely will contribute to the transformation and migration from one economy to the other. Corporations will go away that exist today. One, because they have contributed to the Five Eyes, the spying organizations, and they'll simply be shut down because they're treasonistic/sedition-based corporations. Others will excel in value because they never have been involved with any of those things, and they have a great service, but they were never able to be the default search engine. They were never able to be the most popular social media platform, and they will rise up to replace those organizations. There won't be any censorship of any kind, right? Kim.com is bragging that he is coming up with a total replacement for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. That will be an awesome day when he comes up with that, because he says it's infinite uploads. You can upload movies of any size, and there'll be no censorship of any kind. His launching of that platform will change the entire world, period. But now, we all know that these people are evil. We know that they do things to children that are beyond evil. They do it to get off, and they do it to, we think, stay young. These people are beyond despicable, and I doubt that any one of you, I hope, knows a single person that's that acidically horrible. So what will they do? What else will they do? What are they willing to do? Probably anything that they can get their hands on. They do have agents that work for them, probably outside of any of our alphabet agencies. And yeah, they like to see the world burn. That's what they do. A lot of them just hate us to begin with, right? One of the reasons why America has been under siege, and you need to remember this, is according to the European monarchy, they took their money and they paid for the creation of this country called America. And then we cooed it away from them using the Revolutionary War. So in their mind, we stole this land from them. Now, technically speaking, they're right. We stole this land from them. But what we also stole back was our sovereignty. We formed the Constitution based on Magna Carta. And unlike Magna Carta, we've done much better enforcing it over the years. But again, we're only into this experiment for about 400 years. We're only into the Constitution for, 250? So some of you will go down the path of great concern. I can't say that your caution is not valid. Now, I think that a few things would become true very quickly if this were to occur. We may not see President Trump in public for quite a while, because I think the attempts on his life would be exponentially increased. It would be a financial war of sorts. Now, if Europe would get with the program, and again, a lot of Europeans who watch, you are part of this choir, so I'm not talking to you and I'm not criticizing you at all. You share the same frustrations that we share here in the United States. But on your soil over there is where most of these people live. You want to find them? Well, look for anyone who calls himself a king or a queen. Look for anyone who calls themselves part of a royal family. And that goes for all the dukes and the earls and all these people. Go out in your countryside and look for homes that are worth over $100 million, or families that own 20 of those institutions. They have estates that are worth billions of dollars. Well, that's the cause of the problem for all of us in the world. We have our own over here too, and hopefully Gitmo will be full of a bunch of them. They may stop at nothing to create chaos in the world in order to stop this problem. Now, the stuff I'm going to mention is going to be hopefully not alarming to most of you. It might be alarming to some of you, especially if you just found my channel and you're starting to become woke, but you're not quite there yet. I wouldn't put it past them to cause great damage to this world, to perhaps false flag the some fake war of some kind, right? Some attack somewhere outside the United States, blamed on the United States through some controlled narrative. I think that'd be very difficult, but they could potentially do that. The two things that I hear most often when talking about the potential attacks against the United States for doing this would be detonating a very large bomb in a major city and potentially causing some sort of viral outbreak that doesn't have any foreseeable cure. Some 99% virus, right? Just like Walking Dead. Reset the world, just like the Guidestones say. The Georgia Guidestones speak of the destruction of 99% of the world's population as its first commandment. If you haven't heard about the Georgia Guidestones, you need to go look those up. It's a bunch of monoliths been put together with 10 commandments of how to run the world, and the first one is to reduce world population to 500 million. Given that they wouldn't start at their maximum number, they probably start around 150 million, which gets to the 99%. The 500 million is 98, okay? They could use weapons to create earthquakes, right? I am now pretty convinced that a lot of the major earthquakes we have experienced that start offshore are all bomb tests or bomb weapons, right? The one in Indonesia in 2004 and I think Fukushima both show signs of really no earthquake, but massive tsunami destruction, right? Japan was pretty much intact after this 9.1 or whatever it was earthquake. Then all of a sudden the wave came in and buildings that had survived the 9.1, supposedly, right, just fell over when water hit them, which meant that they weren't that strong to begin with. But again, they wouldn't have survived the 9.1 because the shaking never really occurred. A shake occurred. We saw the video cameras of all those shakes. But the destruction doesn't call out it being a real 9.1 earthquake. Maybe the epicenter of an explosion offshore, it was 9.1. Here's the good news. The good news is that our military, the United States military, of all militaries on planet Earth, has been largely the inventor of all of this technology. The viruses that have been invented in these crazy labs are all controlled by the United States military. I think it's pretty evident that the military is behind Donald Trump. He has more generals at his side than any other president I've ever seen in history, even during wartime. And so it is my hope that they have, before they stirred up the pot, before they shook the bee's hive, They have accounted for all of these anomalies to the best of their ability. They're listening to the entire world. Anyone who communicates through any electronic device is being spied on, whether or not they know it or not. If they transmit anything over the airwaves, it's being monitored and copied and deciphered, right? But they know where we can be attacked, from the sea, from the sky, our water supplies, our cities, which is one reason why the border along Mexico is so important. It's not to keep Mexican citizens out as much as it's to keep out everyone who can pass themselves off as the same color, right? The more olive skin and black hair. But there's a lot of people who will take money for anything. There's obviously a bunch of snowflakes that cry every election. You can definitely find one of these disillusioned kids, probably really young, probably a complete nobody, to do anything that you can put in their hands. Take this downtown and push this red button. You're going to die, but it'll be worth it. Okay. But here's what we have to gain by taking the risk. Our sovereignty. Completing the experiment that is the American dream, which should be a dream for the entire world. Not our culture and our ways of life, but our sovereignty, our republic. Every country should have that around the world. Obviously, we have neighbors like China that are still somewhat communistic. I think over time, just as long as the leaders can stay rich and in power, they'll ease off that paradigm over time. They may have no choice. Who knows? Most countries want to be left alone, right? China hasn't started a war, I believe, in 400 years, more than that. So all this talk about China starting a war with us, you're listening to a globalist creating panic for no reason, in my opinion. But it's important for all of you to think this thing through for yourself, use all the logic that you have, and you might have way more doomsday events in your brain than I have. I have more than I'm talking about here, but I just wanted to give a few so you can think about it. If anything like this occurs, it is important that we are the beacon of truth. Most of you are aware of the event that happened in September of 2001 in America, and the corresponding events in England and Spain. We know that it was an orchestrated event to create a narrative and a rationale and a means and a pretense to do a bunch of stuff in the Middle East. We know that for a fact now, right? Do we know every single person that was involved and who got what? No. Will we ever know? I don't know. Probably not. Hopefully so, but probably not, right? So when it occurred, we were all enjoying the 90s. It rolled over to the 21st century. We're all happy that we made it to the 21st century. And when it occurred, we bought it hook, line, and sinker. Most of us, right? I certainly did. If you didn't, hats off to you, man. Bill Cooper didn't. And they shot him in his front lawn, right? If anything like this occurs, some catastrophic event, it's important that your friends and family close to you are settled down with the truth. It's a horrible event, and we're at war. We're at war for the sovereignty of our children, mainly. But depending on how old you are and how many years you plan on living, your own sovereignty. And sure, it'll be difficult. Every time a criminal commits a crime, this is something you need to remember, the mechanism of that crime becomes exposed, right? You used to have 10 years ago, a lot of snatch and grab burglaries. And it still happens, but it's much rarer now, right? They back a truck into a window, and then they run inside, being stuck in the back of the flatbed of the truck, and they grab items and put it in the truck, pull up the tailgate, and drive off with, $100,000 worth of computers or some bullshit, right? But the more they commit that crime, the method of that crime becomes exposed, and the police get smart to it. They know what to look for, and it becomes much easier to stop that from happening. As each one of these events would occur in the United States, and who knows, maybe they do a dozen in one day. Maybe it's some slow-crawling virus, right? There's that game on the phone. I forgot what it's called. It was like it's not called virus. I don't think it's called pathogen, but it's something that's just you play the game of spreading a virus all over the world. You try to kill as many people as possible. How fucking insane is that, right? We know that predictive programming, which I did an episode on, I took a slightly different angle on it. But predictive programming is a lot of preparing society to accept something they wouldn't otherwise accept. Let me throw this at you as we're closing out this episode. How many shows on TV and how many movies and how many video games have been leaning on this post-apocalyptic world? You have the Fallout series in the video game. You have Rust in the video game realm. You have The Walking Dead on TV. You have, World War Z, the movie with Brad Pitt. There's a tremendous amount of post-apocalyptic shows. 12 Monkeys on Hulu, by the way, it's a great show. My God. It was about a virus that gets loose. Of course, all the people that are the villains of the world become the heroes in these scripts. It's really funny. That's how it gets funded. That's how it gets greenlit. That could be predictive programming for what is part of our future. Can we stop it? I don't know. Hopefully quarantining alone is a practice that'll make it happen. But part of these virus designs is to infect the whole planet before they know it, and then poof, a certain microscopic percentage is immune. For those of you who've studied binary weapons, it's a terrifying technology where you're infected with A and you're fine, totally fine. You live with A inside your body, you even metabolize it as a natural byproduct of your body, and then they hit you with B and you're dead within minutes. These weapons exist in the United States arsenal. I'm sure they exist in other countries, and you never know. It's one of the reasons why we believe that planes shouldn't leave big giant clouds in the sky, which has been pawned off as a military situation. I dearly hope that's not the case. But if we're completely immune to jets dumping stuff on us, whether it be a fuel additive and it's really benign, but blah, 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 doesn't matter. The day they want to spray us with an A, they would use the same apparatus. And if our military is allowing some shadow government to do this to us, and they're not, scrambling F-16s to get these things out of the sky, the second they start spraying a trail, or a second a plane without any identification flies over us, then it could be a problem. I don't want to end this on some alarmist note, okay? I've always been the subscriber to the notion that chaos is not something that these individuals want, because you can't control chaos. Imagine you were just a frail little pasty white guy with all this power in some estate in Europe, and you create this kind of chaos, and all these truthers get together and they siege those houses and they kill those people. Well, that's something they don't want, right? So orchestrating something on that massive level, I think, is, I would say, close to impossible to survive, even them. However, we all know the old analogy of backing an animal into a corner. It goes feral, and whatever it has, it throws it at you, right? And so we have to be careful the velocity of which these changes are made. No one understands that principle more than the United States military commanders. They understand the psychology of war. They understand the psychology of leadership under great pressure and the way that they react. It's their job. They study it constantly. They have expert consulting firms that study it constantly. So when they sit around a table and they plan things, big things, you need to, I think, take some confidence and some security in the fact that we are indeed protected by the organizations that we fund. Now, a lot of people know that the military-industrial complex has been controlled by these individuals for the majority of its existence. I think perhaps, my hopeful thinking, is that this has changed considerably for them, that they've had a rebirth, that people are sick and tired of looking at spy data and finding pedophiles in all levels of government and citizens. I think that, quite frankly, in the history books, if it's ever written truthfully, if QAnon is real and this whole thing is real with Trump as we believe it is, that will come out in the history books, that the time that, after that day in September of 2001 occurred and we increased our spying, we found this and individuals were unwilling to look the other way. And when they were unwilling to look the other way, their eyes were opened, they were enlightened, and they looked all over the world and said, "Oh my God, I had no idea how bad this was." We have lost millions of people in this world due to war. As far as I know, every soldier of every country takes an oath to protect their country. That's the purpose of creating an army. We have cemeteries full of millions and millions of people who have fallen trying to protect that oath. When 10 years ago, I had good exposure to some pretty deep military individuals and just some individuals who served their 10 years and got out. They did a bunch of covert operations and all this other stuff. And I haven't really been told about any covert operations or anything in any specific detail. They would just simply say I was at a place where, according to the world history, I was never at. These events never occurred, that kind of thing, right? But I said, what would you do if your government said, the United States of America especially, this is where the conversation was centered, if they said, seize all the weapons of all the people, get rid of the Second Amendment? And I had a very decorated individual who managed the war theater and a big chunk of the war theater in the Middle East essentially say, that's when we would arrest the person who gave us the order. And I said, really? Tell me more. What motivates that instant turnaround? Why wouldn't you do that right now? And he goes, well, right now it's just a conspiracy theory coming out of you guys on YouTube and online. But the second it becomes a reality, we know that all those conspiracies are now suddenly true, or more true than false, right? This guy was very seasoned. He was in his 50s. And he said, every single soldier that's ever been to war, and pretty much every soldier that's been in the military for the last 20 years, has lost a friend. A lot of families have lost their loved ones. And he said that command alone, which is pretty much a tiny change compared to all the stuff we've covered in this video, that basically disgraces every single tombstone of at least American soldiers, why they died, why they took their oath, and it invalidates the oath that everyone took who's currently in the military. So in order to preserve the integrity of those who gave their lives for freedom, we have to be willing to put our skin in the game and arrest those trying to make those types of changes. I thought that was extremely enlightening to me and gave me a big breath of fresh air. So I want to leave you guys with that, because I do believe that 99.9% of this planet is very peaceful. We just want to get along. We want our big TVs. We don't worry about anyone paratrooping in our backyards for some stupid reason. We will work it out if the Federal Reserve crashes in this country. Will there be a little bit of chaos? Sure, especially on the first day, maybe even the first week. But the human mind can't hang on to that much negativity and that much energy going in a bad place. We can't. And so we'll calm down and we'll find solutions, because what will man want to do? Man will want to find a solution. We just so happen at this particular state have a very healthy, wise president who has even smarter people behind him ushering this through this era. It is probably an imperative that this event occur if we really want to gain back the strength and sovereignty of at least America. For the Europeans, it applies to you just as much. All of you have old plates of your money, and you just need to get them off the shelf and redo them so that it's your money. Get your monarchs off your money, okay? It's for the people, it's not for the monarchs, right? If you want to honor a leader that has been a good leader to your country, then put their face on the money, okay? It's probably sketchy to say, but I hope it occurs. Do I fear for my own financial security when that occurs? Sure, absolutely. But I have faith that we'll figure it out. If I have to be homeless for 2 years to make this event occur, so be it. I realize I've lived my entire life already, pretty much, in terms of all the goals I ever wanted, and I can say that a little bit more securely, but I have a child. I don't want that child to go through some horrible state. But if I look at her life in this rat race versus a little bit of discomfort for a couple of years, and then she can live an amazing life afterwards, and your kids too, I think we owe it to our kids to pull it through. But we're going to have to be the adults to keep them calm and to contribute to the solutions. I think at this point there are more schematics for fixing this problem than there are to keep it going, right? Economic collapse and boom and bust cycles are all based on the old system, the current system, being in place. Once we replace it, that'll be a thing of yesteryear. It really will. And I think we want to go there. That's about all I have here. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's audio, video, a locked Facebook group, and a Patreon page. For everyone who supports me, I very much appreciate it. This is our endeavor. I never thought when I created this show and said the words, rebuilding society from the ground up, that we would ever truly have that capability so quickly, especially during the lifetime of this show. It looks like we might actually get that opportunity. So you guys are brilliant people. You have amazing knowledge I don't have. Use it. You know, when someone asks me the question, what can I do to help? Everything. Spread information, research things, use your intelligence, not just your smarts. Combine the two to create great solutions. Think about what you would do in your local region if that ever occurred. Where you're going to get your food from, where you're going to get your resources from. Think about those things. You probably don't have to be a doomsday prepper, but, you know, do a little bit to secure your thought process in this. Maybe even brief people in your local circle. Well, this might occur, and I want you not to panic because this is probably the things that are going to occur. Right? Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.